Hello and welcome to today's webinar, the NextGen Information Professional, How to Stay on Top of Your Game. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are AIIM President John Mancini and Iron Mountain's thought leader Sue Trombley, and Iron Mountain is the underwriter of today's webinar. And we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open and close or resize the different widgets that to your own preferences. And across the bottom of your screen is the list of all the widgets that are available to you today. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resource list on the right side of your screen. And feel free to ask questions throughout the hour using the Q&A feature that's on the left side. We will hold these questions until the end where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But do also feel free to ask questions during the hour because the speakers, as they can, they'll pick up the questions and try to answer them as they go along today. If you do have any technical difficulty, feel free to click on that Help widget, and it has a question mark icon, and it covers some common technical issues that could help you out. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Webinars on Demand library in just a few days. I just want to take this opportunity right now to introduce our speakers today. Thrilled to have both these people with us. John Mancini is an author, speaker, and respected leader of the AIIM global community of information professionals. He believes that a wave of digital transformation will sweep through businesses and organizations now face a fundamental choice between information opportunity and information chaos. John regularly blogs at the Digital Landfill and can be found on various social media channels at jmancini77. And also with us today, we have Sue Trombley, and Sue is the Managing Director of Thought Leadership at Iron Mountain. And she provides the information management and global communities of practice with new ways of thinking in order to make their jobs easier and to help them showcase their value. She writes and publishes content, often collaborating with internal and external subject matter experts. And Sue speaks at association meetings and conferences, including the upcoming AIIM conference, which we'll mention that a little bit later on in the webinar. And she also hosts and presents webinars, writes blogs, and has a podcast series. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to John Mancini and go ahead and let him begin. John?
Awesome, Teresa. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so pleased to be here with Sue. Sue is a former member of the AIIM Board of Directors, and she and I have done podcasts in the past, and I think we'll have a fun 45 or 50 minutes here, and we encourage everybody to ask questions along the way. We'll try to get those in the context of the topic, but we'll also have some time at the end for questions. So what I wanted to do is basically tee up the concept here, and I think there's three tensions that I've seen out in the marketplace that really play to this point on the slide, that your employers aren't sure what you do and you're not sure what they expect of you. And the three tensions that I see are, the first one relates to the information management landscape as a whole. And what's going on there, I think everybody has a feel for this, is that this landscape is changing at an exponential rate. It's changing in terms of the volume and velocity and variety of information that we have to manage in our programs. And it's also changing really dynamically in terms of the kinds of solutions people use. It's changing very dynamically in terms of the kind of devices they use. And so, first tension, lots and lots of change, very, very volatile atmosphere for people that are in the business of managing information assets. Second tension is that I don't think that business leaders really fully understand this concept of information management and information governance yet. They tend to view this in technology terms and as a technology issue rather than a business practice issue. And often what happens is that they confuse records management with information governance. Lots of times people don't really have information governance. They might have a records management program, but they haven't expanded it to be much more holistic and comprehensive in nature. And so the definitions are in a state of flux right now. And then the third tension, which I see out there, is that We have an environment, given the first two, that you've got a lot of disconnect between intentions and reality. And we see this in our surveys all the time. We see big gaps between what people are trying to do and what they're actually doing. Most organizations lack an information governance committee with wide representation. Many of the IG policies that they produce are lacking in terms of covering things like mobile content and external access. Lots of people struggle with the entire question of how do they enforce all these policies once they're created. And so, those three tensions, radically changing landscape, a lack of understanding of what information governance actually is within the business community, and huge gaps between intentions and reality, I think, stack up into this very confused state that we're in right now. So we'd like to talk a little bit about, what does that mean for information professionals, and share some research that we did together with Iron Mountain. And you can find that research on the little resources widget in your view. You can just take a look at that either now or later. You'll find PDFs of the slides. You'll find a link to our Information Governance Center. You'll find copies of this particular report as well. And so take a look at that when you have a chance. And before turning it over to Sue, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of the demographics of what was in this survey, just so you have a sense of, well, who are these people and what are their perspectives? So just very quickly, it was done in May 2015. There were 264 responses. It was a pretty good mix of small, medium, large. So large being organizations with over 5,000 employees. That was 28% of the survey mix. Mid-size, which were 500 to 5,000, 28%. And small, which we start at 10 employees, we don't go below that, was 45%. Geographically, pretty significant representation from North America, about 61% from North America, and 21% from the UK and Europe. And then lastly, in terms of role and industry within the organization, very high representation from industries that you would expect in a survey like this. 17% of the respondents were from government, 11% from finance and insurance, 10% from energy and mining and oil and gas. And then in terms of role, 44% of the people in this survey had job titles that were focused on records and compliance, 14% from business, and 20% from IT. So a pretty good mix, a little bit heavily dominated of compliance-y kinds of people, but a good mix of IT and business and records and compliance folks, which really I think is a good mix to start the conversation in terms of, what do people really need to know if they're going to be successful as an information professional, as a next generation information professional moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Sue at this point, and Sue's going to walk through some of the highlights of some of the data that we gathered along the way. So Sue, take it away.
Thank you, John, and many thanks to your research team for making this information available to us. I really want to emphasize to all of the folks on today's webinar the timeliness of this advice that we're going to be sharing, because unfortunately we're seeing a disturbing trend of really strong records and information management professionals being let go from fairly large organizations. And I think this speaks to this chronic case of our being undervalued as a profession and as a community. So what can we do to combat this condition is really the genesis of this research. What do we need to do to change, and how do we respond to and meet senior leader expectations today, and then looking forward as well. So let's look at some of the results. And while we say that these are expected proficiencies over the next 3 to 5 years, I think for some of you on the webinar, you're going to need to be addressing these gaps or concerns today. So what does senior leadership expect of you? What do they want you to know about? Well, they need you to continue to be proficient in managing risk. And you're doing that now. That's embedded into your records and information management programs, and if you have an IG program, then it's there as well. Now, though, they want you, in your RIM capacity, to focus more on security and data privacy. So be on top of what kinds of changes are happening and are in the future. If you deal with, if you're a global concern and you're dealing with the European Union, you know that there's significant changes happening there today and also over the next months and years, as well as having this sense of the technology that's available to help with the challenges of security and privacy and meeting, avoiding data breaches. As John said, technology factors into most everything that we're doing. Coming in second is content and records management. And this should be not just records, right, but all information and data. We need to tag the content regardless of the format where it sits, and not just for retention, but also for its potential value and its vulnerability too. So that's an extension or expansion of perhaps what you're doing today with content and records management. Analytics is huge. This is all about revenue and competitive advantage, driving value out of that information that you have in your organization or that you may buy or lease or pull from the Internet of Things. And this is where the money is going. IDC estimates that by 2018, enterprises will spend nearly $90 billion on data analytics. So it's so important for us to align ourselves as RIM pros with data analysis because it really does hit the bottom line of the organization. And then taxonomy and metadata management is another one of the proficiencies. I'm sure a lot of you are already involved in that, but this might mean taking it to another level and exploring more, again, tools or technology to support what you need to do to tag the content, again, beyond just perhaps for retention purposes, but understanding where PII, personally identifiable information, resides, the value, the impact of the data, etc. And I just wanted to note that at a recent ARMA chapter meeting up in Boston, we had a panel talk about their view on NextGen InfoPro observations, and it was interesting because they said they've been successful because they actually align themselves with the financial goals of their company. They're not out there necessarily proselytizing records and information management, but finding that hook that they can connect to. So, for example, in a pharma concern, they associated themselves with mergers and acquisitions. They really got into the mix to support that process. And a consulting firm connected up with compliance and audit so to meet the increased demand of their customers for audits. So I think the moral of the story here is just it's so important to take the initiative and really jump into this expectation of what senior leaders want you to do. In terms of capabilities, this is really what you need to be able to do, and they're clearly in sync with what you're being asked to know about. So ensuring access to information across all platforms and devices, as John said, this is just a booming environment for us. The landscape is changing. We've got to deal with all sorts of platforms, all sorts of mobile devices. We need to know what's happening in the cloud, and we need to know what's happening in different geographies in which we do business, whether that's states or provinces or between countries. So that is all part of this accessibility issue. We have to be involved in data management, and that has to include making sure the data is accurate, it's clean, it's harmonized, meaning you can pull data, similar data from different applications without a horrible process to go through. We need to be able to know where to migrate content to for cost efficiencies and access. So all of this is part of what you're going to need to be able to talk to and influence. Again, information security and access control. We've got to be able to talk about securing and protecting information. And one of the key tenets of data analytics is to democratize data, which essentially means let anyone who thinks they need access to information in any place, use it for analytics. But we have to be mindful, and you're in a particularly good place to do this, of regulatory obligations as to protecting private information, not only your customers but your own, and the need to limit access to intellectual property. So while everybody wants to have their hands on this information, you need to also understand and convey the concerns around any sort of privacy issues or sensitivity. And lastly, supporting analytics projects to improve those customer experiences or increase productivity or identify new products. All of that, again, no vertical or industry sector is immune. It all hits the bottom line. So let's move on and just look at what our senior leaders expect us to know about technology. They certainly want us to continue to be aware of the tools and implementation abilities to insert taxonomy and metadata into our information governance and management programs. So we've all probably dealt with ECMs and ECRMs, but it's now we're being asked to look beyond records and into information and understand as it travels through its life cycle where metadata can be assigned to indicate where it's more valuable or indicate where it's vulnerable. And that's expanding what we've done in the past with metadata and taxonomies. Information security, again, knowing what systems and applications are in place to protect that information from exposure. Not all data needs to be protected with the same amount of rigor or cost. If you talk to people in the cybersecurity space, they'll tell you that. So it's really important to rank data on its impact from high to low, and there's room for our profession to get involved in that as well. Process analysis and modeling is another one of the technical skills, and this could include using data analytics to better understand where those efficiencies may be, but also taking a look at work processes and workflows and understanding how to tag data as it moves through that flow. And then lastly, be involved in this selection of applications and its implementation. And I think one of the things John will cover is these senior leaders want us to be more involved in change management so that these implementations and integration into the working day of our employees is successful. So, this is quite a shift. For the last couple of years, we've heard a lot about SharePoint in the cloud, and our focus has been on that, but those haven't gone away. But that isn't necessarily where our senior leaders are focusing right now in terms of technology, or that's not where they're putting resources either. So just to summarize then where we are, and John, if you want to hop in at any point in time, we've got to continue to be focused on risk, but expand that window into privacy and security. We've got to continue doing our daily work in the content and records management space, but think broader, think more about the totality of information, as well as the devices on which it can be rendered or stored, and then how to tag it so that you can access it and protect it and get rid of it when you need to as efficiently as possible. Analytics is big. Again, so much money going to be focused in this, and lots of new staff coming on board in data analytics roles as well. So we need to help them find the sources of data, help them understand its quality, because garbage in and garbage out is a big problem here. Find dark data, and that's an expectation for you. And lastly, being strategic, both from a process perspective as well as a technology perspective. The whole goal is becoming more consultative, expanding your horizons. So John, any comments before I turn over to you?
Yeah, no, I actually think it's a pretty perfect segue, Sue, because I think what you're talking about here, you start to think about this question of the changed nature of expectations and the changed nature of what's going on within the environment right now. And it really focuses on these 4 areas. And let me just stop for a minute. I have a little bit of a buzzing in my ear. Is that common through everybody?
No, I don't
I'm
think
hearing
so.
that.
Okay, it is
I was
gone
hearing
now,
that too,
so
John.
that was, whatever that is, it is gone now. So apologize for that little bit of a blip. But no, I think what you have here is a really interesting jumping off point for thinking about this question of what does professional competency mean in the context of these expectations. And so I think these expectations basically point to a need to be much more proactive as a profession than we've been before. And I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but records management has always had a bit of a kind of a passive after the fact kind of a feel to it. And I think we have to view it much more in the context somewhat like interventional medicine. The idea here of interventional medicine is to assess a situation before it becomes a serious issue. And I think in the same way, like NextGen InfoPros, they have to be able and enabled and empowered to assess information environments, to assess potential risks, to anticipate negative outcomes. And then I think the point that Sue made, which is like so important in all this, is to position what we all collectively do in the context of the things that the business values. That I think if we continue to view this as an element of like good hygiene or good housekeeping or the equivalent of, having your bran in the morning and stuff like that, eat your spinach, those are all great things and those are all good things. But we've got to reposition what we do in the context of the objectives that the business has. And so as you think about this, I think it really ties to the survey results and to what Sue was talking about of a migration from records and information management to kind of this concept of an information management professional. And I think moving forward, I think what Sue said is exactly on target with what I hear from folks, is that there are specialties within this. And so you don't necessarily have to be expert in all of these things. I think folks have to have an awareness of these, have to understand the language of risk, the language of security, the language of privacy, the language of content and records management, the language of analytics. Some folks are going to be specialists in that, and other folks are going to have a more general understanding of those. But that's the direction this is headed. And that really is a very, very different profile of a profession, I think, than we would have written, say, 5 to 7 years ago. And it really carries over
and
into
John,
this slide.
John, if I could just add that there's also that shift from job titles being records managers to information managers, or at a minimum, records and information managers. So that really jumped out pretty profoundly, that people are trying to get that title changed.
Yep, exactly. And it really carries over into this slide, which is perhaps a little bit different. I think, Sue, if you're going on mute, I think that's what's triggering the reverb on there. Is when you think about this from the context of technical skills, and you have skills that are strong, that are adequate, or that are weak, and you think about each of these items on the left-hand side, contents and records management, business process management, taxonomy and metadata capture, so on and so on down the list, it actually points a lot to the approach that we've taken at AIIM to thinking about professional certification relative to these skills. So been a lot of conversation in the last couple of months about AIIM and certification and our Certified Information Professional program and so on and so on. But really, when I look at this slide, what we're trying to do actually maps pretty well against this. So we're trying to do two things with our education and training program. The first one is that we want to provide deep dive skills development in each of these different competencies on the left-hand side. And that corresponds to our training curriculum and what we call our practitioner and master designations that we provide. At the same time, what we also want to do is we want to provide a broad look across all of these things. And that's what our Certified Information Professional program is all about. And so, think of it like deep dive, practitioner and master. Think of it surface look across all of them is the CIP. And I think we've done a pretty good job. When I look at there's over 1,000 CIPs out there, and there's probably about 10,000 masters out there. And so, on the one hand, I look at that and I think, oh, gosh, we're doing really well. I look at the CRM program that has, in our little part of the marketplace, pretty good understanding out there. The IGP that AIIM is doing is growing. But I think we all collectively have a challenge out there. I was looking at some Google data before we started this, and what I did was I basically took Certified Information Professional, Certified Records Manager, Information Governance Professional, ECM Master, and I did Google searches on all those terms. And they all come back in the neighborhood of 12 to 20,000 hits when you do it. And so when I say that we have a challenge ahead of us, if I put in another professional certification that we all value and respect, which is the Project Management Professional, if I put in Project Management Professional, all in quotation marks, I get 10.9 million hits. And so I think a big challenge that we all have is to work together in both the vendor community and the user community to popularize these certifications, to make sure people understand what level of competency and what need they're designed to achieve, and make this the standard within the industry. So that's kind of point one. Last thing I just wanted to talk about is this soft skills thing, which I think is really cool and interesting, and the survey was really interesting in this regard. And when we looked at this, we asked the question of, what was the management expectation of these soft skills? And then what was the practitioner assessment of their current ability relative to these skills? So if you look at the top part of the chart, you think about, okay, the gap between the blue bar and the greenish bar, that basically represents some of the places that we need to develop skills as a collective group. And it really reflects what Sue was saying. Basically, when you talk about innovative ways of thinking and you talk about change management and you talk about that gap that exists there, that basically is code for we have got to become more relevant to the needs and desires of the business, and we have to interject ourselves into the business. And so, that's really, really an important point. And then the bottom part of the slide, where you look at the gap between the green and the blue, that's basically places that I think those are places where management undervalues what we all collectively know right now. And so, whether it's ARMA or whether it's AIIM or whether it's all of us as individual practitioners, I think we have to do a better job of educating our managements about the skills that exist, about the abilities that exist, and about how germane they are to the question of creating a responsible climate for information governance. So that's a lot in one fell swoop. I'm going to turn it over to Sue, who's going to talk a little bit about this question of, how do we think about change moving forward? Maybe hopping off of that bullet point on the last slide about change management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So, based on these findings, I think there's no doubt that the next generation, and I think the current generation too, have to embrace change and develop new skills and capabilities, which isn't always easy. But we're going to talk about some ways to do that. I just wanted to note that quote on this slide. I was at a panel recently on information governance, and an e-discovery lawyer told the audience that large numbers of the specialists that her firm used to use to search through data to find responsive information in litigation are now largely gone. They've been replaced by informatics. And what we don't want to see is that the information management professional, we don't want you to become irrelevant or superseded by data analysts or others in a chief data officer's team. So, we want to stem this tide or trend of again, really seasoned records and information management professionals not getting the attention they need and being cut loose from organizations. So how do we add to our existing talent pool? Both as an individual or as a team, your records and information management group. And we're going to look at where you can turn to begin that journey, to really see where you might be able to pick up more information about those topics that you're expected to be conversant about, and also, in most cases, capable of execution. So where do you get your smarts? Budgets are tight, and we had a couple of comments come through in Q&A, saying, I'm not given the funds to pursue professional development or pursue certification. So I think that many of us are in that boat. Most of us learn on the job as a result. It's nearly 80% are saying that is their mode of becoming a more seasoned records and information manager. So, but the challenge here is because now we need to acquaint ourselves with more newer topics, we're going to have to find different people to reach out to, I think, within organizations. And that might be the privacy team, the security officer, as well as a data analytics team, individual. That may be a standalone group, depending on the size of your organization, or they may be embedded in IT. But in any case, we need to reach out and become more acquainted with the functions that they're performing and determine how we can best interact with them. Professional training from independent sources like AIIM is still a very high percentage in how we acquire expertise. So we've got ARMA, we've got the IGI, vertical-oriented groups. We're all spending more time on these emerging topics that we've addressed so far in the presentation. And then there are vendors who offer boot camps, which are really quite cool in that it's kind of an immersion into certain topics and can bring you up to speed quite quickly. But again, this all comes back to having a budget. And then some of you may be fortunate enough to pursue college degrees. I think this is made easier in a way because there are some solid online programs that you can get involved in. University of Pittsburgh, San Jose State are some that come to mind, and I've seen people do really well in pursuing further education with them. So at the end of the day, we have to be proactive to demonstrate our value. And so next we're going to look at some of the preferred methods of professional development that we received from the respondents of the survey. Over half say that they prefer online courses, and I think this makes sense. It supports the flexibility of being able to self-educate at home or in a different time zone with little or no restrictions. So we encourage you to look for courses that may be available to you through professional associations or even your company's learning management provider if you do have one. And you can always look in LinkedIn now. Lynda.com has some courses that are reasonably priced, but it's almost you have to go hunting for the kind of education that you want through online courses. Fortunately, conferences are still popular, John. So we've got
we're doing one April 26th through 28th
in New Orleans, and of course we encourage people to go to AIIM. It's a fresh and inviting environment with lots of opportunities to network with your peers. Also, ARMA will be in September, and then there are other opportunities to be educated as well through MER and InfoGovCon, Information Governance Initiative. So, you need to choose wisely, look at the courses that are, or the educational program, keynote speakers, and really pick where you want to spend that hard-earned and scarce money. 44% say they still like to use articles and books, whether print or electronic, in order to really dive into specific topics, perhaps, rather than just sort of address a broader view. That could be blogs, online magazines, e-books, print books, etc. And then, of course, we encourage you to take advantage of these webinars. I think that they're helpful. I like the kind where we can have a dialogue, like, for example, John and I, but there are many that are available to you. And another source of information that I use a lot is our sites like Tech Target and Knowledge Management World. They really do help me stay up to date with what's happening around privacy, security, technology, big data, analytics, and all of the mix that we need to know about. So where does our organization stand, though, in terms of helping us grow? Unfortunately, for most of us, we don't get that support from our employers. So it really means that we have to take the initiative in order to do the things to meet their expectations. And the number of survey respondents, 75%, it's really quite discouraging and disappointing that there isn't that financial support for our profession. And I'm sure that many of you on the call identify with this. It's an issue. And I think it all relates back to what we said earlier, and John reiterated this, is that this fundamental chronic issue. We really are hindered by our senior leadership's continued lack of awareness about information management, information governance, and specifically about what we do within our organizations to support those functions. And I think the bottom line is that we really end up having to be our own advocates in many situations. And again, look for these opportunities, try to get the funding where we can, but look for these opportunities where we can take advantage of free webinars or free workshops to expand our skill set and our capabilities. Even though, our employers expecting it of us, they are not yet ready to finance us. So John, anything you want to add there before we get into our summary of what we can do to not get left behind?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's such an appetite out there, and we've got to figure out ways to make some of this information more affordable and more accessible, and to convince the business that they need to spend money on this. I think about just our own training experience here. If I look at my records management course that we do, and I look at my information governance course that we do, it won't come as any surprise to people on the call today that records and governance and compliance people are the single largest participant in those courses. So that's kind of a duh sort of thing. But what probably would surprise some of these folks, if I look at my ECM course, my taxonomy and metadata course, if I look at my business process management course, all of those, my capture course, all of those, the largest single constituency of people that take those are records and governance and compliance titles in organization, which says to me that there is this huge appetite out there. And we just have to figure out a way. I think we've had a lot of focus in the association world on competencies at what I would call the very, very tippy top of the records and governance pyramid. And I personally think there's a much broader swath of people that need these skills. And I think it's reflected in the folks that come to some of our training courses that probably surprise folks. And so, I think it definitely ties to this, these next slides we put together, just kind of some summary things. And, when I think about that first bullet point, Sue, about, assess your expertise, and identify and fill those gaps. And I think decide whether you are a deep dive player, in which case, depending on your role in the organization, you may need to be a content analytics expert or an ECM expert or a BPM expert. Or on the other hand, you may need to be the world's best generalist, in which case you need a swath across. But it all is, dependent on kind of your role in the organization.
Yeah, I agree. And I keep coming back to lessons learned about really orienting yourself to your organization's goals, right? And again, that comes mostly back to revenue generation and finding where that could be your opportunity to really show demonstrate what you can do, prove that information management can influence outcomes. So I think it's looking across the organization, having conversations with people that you may not have before to really understand then, how far, what elements or components of what we've talked about today are significant for your business. I mean, data analytics may not factor, pardon me?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I think it really ties to those last two bullets on here too. This need to engage with people.
Right, and not just the normal people, not IT, not only IT or compliance like you've talked about, but stretch it out. If you've got a data officer, knock on his or her door. Analysts, scientists, your chief privacy and security officers. It's really letting them know you exist and the value that you bring. I think the create. So we've got the assess piece, John, but I really am an advocate for sitting down again and creating a development plan. I mean, just lay it on out there. Whether you can get the money or not, at least you've spoken your piece. Perhaps if you're able to and insistent enough, you might get the funds to send someone to AIM or any other some other sort of training event. But not only for you, but for the entirety of your staff to raise that knowledge level across the board.
And we've had
and John, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. We've had some companies that have actually worked with us to build up kind of a schematic to do that for broad swaths of their staff. These tend to be really, really large companies, and I think the challenge which you talked about earlier, Sue, is that when you get into organizations that either don't have that degree of commitment or are smaller or more mid-sized organizations, you really have to almost take personal responsibility for your own development plan and position yourself accordingly. And then I guess the last thing on this slide that just grabs me is that last one, which I guess we're guilty of acronym ITIS here at the end, Chief Privacy Officer, CPO, and CSO, Chief Security Officer. I think positioning there is such a huge opportunity for folks in this space. Every organization is scared to death of becoming the next Target when it comes to a security breach, or the next Sony when it comes to a security breach, or the next government agency with a security breach. And somehow we don't really come to mind when those folks get together. And I think that's something that we've been trying to correct, because I think we have a real critical role to play when it comes to information privacy and security.
Yeah, and I think you need to be inviting more of them to AIM.
Yep. No, definitely. And so I think when you start to think about this in terms of from other places, we've said this before, but figuring out where those subject matter experts lie. They're in industries, they're in vendors, they're in associations. Bring them into the conversation. Do your best to stay up to speed on the current technologies. I find it incredibly difficult to do, but we've got to do it because this stuff is changing at a pace that we can't possibly keep up with.
And John, that's when I mentioned, Tech Target and Knowledge Management World. Yep. You can get information pushed to you every day, every week, but they are right on top of everything that's happening today. They curate all different sources, and I find that it's very, very helpful to stay up to speed using tools like that or accessing those kinds of tools.
What's your take on this last one, Sue, about I like this concept a lot about being a broker between the teams, and what kind of skills do you think are necessary in order to be effective in that role?
Well, I keep coming back to the fact that information management professionals, first of all, they have to be really passionate about what they do, but they are really today, I think, filling the role of a consultant. And in a lot of the organizations that I'm honored to work with, business units are kind of out there doing their own thing, and over time, they've abdicated some control of their records to others like IT, and now the whole notion is, how do we re-engage with business units so that they can take back more responsibility for the records that they own, they create, and they receive. So one of the notions here is that as data analytics just continues to grow, that the folks in records and information management could potentially be that person that sits between the business unit or line of business and with an understanding of all the kinds of information that particular business line creates, and a data analyst that's out there that's been given some sort of mission, right? So whether it's marketing or manufacturing, someone's come to them and said, find out how to do something better. And so by kind of putting them, records managers and information managers, putting themselves in the middle of that discussion can be that broker or that connection, that liaison between what's actually happening in the business and the kind of information that they've got and what an analyst is seeking. So that may seem very ideal, but it is a place where RIM pros can find a home in this data analytics landscape.
Definitely, and I've got a couple of summary points I wanted to make. But before I kind of hop into that, I wanted to touch on a couple questions because I think there's some interesting ones that tie to what we just kind of went through. The first one, I know my buddy Chris Walker won't mind me identifying him. It wasn't a question, but a comment, and I really like what he said here, which is that next-gen information professionals need to be part management consultant, part business analyst, part information and solutions architect, part change manager, and that implies an awful lot of different skills. And gosh, those people are worth their weight in gold or platinum. I mean, that is the core, I think. I think another question that pops up, and Sue, maybe you have a take on this. I know I do, but how is all this different than data governance? Is a question: does data governance encompass all of this? Is it different? Is it how is it different than information governance?
Well, that's a good one because it's really interesting. I think out there right now, people are using terms interchangeably. Data, information, records, and in a purist format, the data are really the sort of bits and bobs, the building blocks that would be assembled to create some piece of information, of which some could be a record, right? So that's kind of the very basic sort of take on this. So I think data governance is more specific to the management of the databases, access controls, really more focused on that side of the house rather than the broader information management piece. What's a record, what's not, but that's where I think the lines are becoming blurred, and that's where I kind of fear for our profession, because as data analysts get in and start touching the data to use it for the outcome, competitive benefit, whatever, they're touching the data. It may be that some of the responsibilities then for protecting it, managing it, could become, could transition over to them. So I'm not, I think, John, I'm curious to hear what you have to say, but I think that it's still very fuzzy now as to who does what and what actually means what.
Yeah, I find it really it used to be that the world was so easily divided between in our world what we would call unstructured content and information, and structured content and structured information, which was data. And what I find I find a couple things. First of all, those lines are really blurring. Secondly, most organizations don't know what we're talking about. when we when we make that distinction. It's just all information to them. I think thirdly, there's a lot of education that needs to go on between these worlds because people tend to speak different languages. And what I mean by that is that I was recently on a big data panel, and I was talking about unstructured information. And then I was listening to the folks from the big data world talk about unstructured information. And I realized in the middle of this conversation that we were talking about two completely different things. I was talking about TIFF images and PDFs and PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and stuff like that. And they were talking about like the exhaust stream from their websites and the exhaust stream from social interactions and stuff that comes off of the Internet of Things. And they're both things that need to be managed, but there's a language ambiguity right now that I think we've got to spend some time educating people on.
Yeah, I agree. And but that said, I mean, I know certain financial institutions now where records and information management reports to the chief data officer. So again, those lines are blurring, and I think there's a lot more to be to come out of this. There's some evolution here.
So let me we keep some questions coming. We still got about 10 minutes or so, I think moving forward, and 8 minutes, okay. And Tara, I won't call you out, but in answer to your question, ping me at johnmancini@aim.org, and we'll see what we can do. johnmancini@aim.org for Tara. And let me give you 7 things that I was thinking about in terms of steps maybe. And we've covered most of these during the course of the conversation, but I was just jotting them down as we talked. Number 1, assess your internal expertise and identify and fill gaps. Secondly, seek out subject matter experts across your entire broad network. Third, identify new and emerging technologies and try to think about how they're going to impact your operations and get ahead of those. Fourth, really think about this mobile question because that has all sorts of implications from a governance perspective. Fifth, I personally would try to change your title away from records manager, information manager, or records manager to something like information manager or knowledge manager or director of information governance or something like that. Sixth, I would try to be much more aggressive in engaging with the organization and bringing folks like us in to help your organization understand the importance of what you do. And then lastly, try to position, we talk a lot about at AIM about information is your organization's most important asset and learn the skills to manage it. And if information is your most important asset, then NextGen information professionals are the people who have a critical role to play. And we all need to talk about that much more aggressively than we have in the past. And so I will pass the baton and kind of look through some of these questions, keep them coming as Sue talks. And Sue, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys do and just give a little bit of a summary here.
Yeah, I'll just do a few words about Iron Mountain before we take a few more questions. But I would imagine that most of you probably know Iron Mountain as a box storage vendor. But I do want to let you know that we do provide professional services such as information governance consulting, on-site staffing, and we have a new approach to developing and maintaining records retention schedules now using the cloud, and a really cool way to push out changes based on laws and regulations to your retention schedule as the change happens. So not having to depend on some maintenance cycle like every year, every 2 years. So that's kind of an exciting new offering for us, and that's both domestic or North American and international global schedules. We know we live in a hybrid world of paper and electronic records, and our data management services or document management services help bridge that gap through imaging projects and discovery support, as well as hosting images in the cloud. And we're also going to be launching some exciting additional cloud offerings later this year when it comes to images and how to manage them. Our data management services, we really are into the protection and being a guardian of your assets. So this encompasses recovery of data and escrow services for software. And we recently opened data centers for the secure storage of large volumes of information. In fact, Uber is a new customer of ours. And of course, you can always store your disaster recovery tapes with us or archival tapes. We have all of those climate-controlled facilities. And then shred, of course, and at end of life, certainly for paper, you want to securely dispose of that. And we also can help you get rid of your e-waste, those pesky printers and laptops and other devices that have your organization's information on them. And then one other thing, this is new and different for us, but we now can store fine art. We just bought a company called Box Butler for personal storage services in New York City, and we've just end of last year, opened up a brand new facility to specifically store geological core samples for the energy sector. So we really are evolving, and again, we can be the guardians of your box and your tape, but we can also do more for you as well. And then lastly, what I wanted to do...
That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point, Sue. You guys are not just documents.
No, heavens no.
Yeah,
no,
it's really interesting. Yeah.
Right, and yet that people put us in the box all the time.
Yep, so to speak.
We do more. Yeah, indeed. But what I also want to just tell you is that we do have a thought leadership site. My job is to become, a voice for you. If you visit our site, you see it here. It has nothing to do with sales. It's all about giving back to you, proven practices, as well as ways of thinking about things differently and getting a sense of what's coming around the corner. So please visit the site. You can reach out to me at any point in time. Again, it's not going to try to sell you anything. It's a tool for you. It's Iron Mountain giving back to our community of practice. So John, I think you're up next, right?
Yeah, so we've got time for a few more questions, and I got a couple teed up. You have a couple more, please feel free to put them in there. While that's coming in, I do blog under the title Digital Landfill, so if you want to follow me and keep up on the trends in the industry, that's a good place to go. As I mentioned earlier, the report that we're talking about, which gives you a lot of more of the details of what we covered, you can get it at this website right here. You can get the executive summary there, or in your little resources widget on the screen. You can download it straight out from there, along with a PDF of the presentation that we put together here. I think in terms of questions, we've got time for just a couple more, and let me tee up this one for you, Sue. This is a question in relation to any advice for folks that are focused more narrowly on retention and disposition, that really have that as a key part of their job responsibilities. I think that probably is definitely in a legal environment as well.
Yeah, well, I think again. So what's the hook there to raise awareness? And I would imagine it would if there's some way to show cost savings, efficiencies, that's always helpful in any business, big or small, if you can help show that you're helping the bottom line. Defensible disposition programs are huge and often not successul, but if you can find the right advocates to help with that, I think that's always an opportunity. As well as becoming putting yourself out there as a trainer, or at least being able to make people more aware of the benefits and the need to manage information to prevent risk. And if you can highlight the specific kinds of risks that you're more apt to fall into, then that would help as well. And I have an Iron Mountain question. Actually, I think someone asked about the core samples. I would.
Yep.
You can go. Yep, you can go online. It's a facility that we have outside of Houston, and it's specific for storing those heavy duty chunks of earth that you pull up out of pipes, etc., in energy. So, or reach out to me, and I can give you more information about that.
How about there's a question here. I'll give you my answer, and then you can give one as well, Sue. It's somebody who's getting started in developing a records policy and data classification policy, and any advice there? One piece of advice that I would have is to check out the AIIM training, particularly the information governance course, and also, if you really have an appetite for it, the taxonomy and metadata course. But you might have some other suggestions as well.
Well, I think if you check out, again, our thought leadership site, too, we have best practice documents, you know, so that can be, and then follow, you know, kind of follow where that takes you in terms of, you know, what does a good records retention schedule look like, et cetera, what does a policy need to consist of. I think there's some good assets out there between AIM and Iron Mountain for sure.
So, and again, I had one more question asking, I talked too fast, I know, the name of my blog, which is Digital Landfill. It's info.aim.org/digital-landfill. And just as we wrap up here, if you haven't made plans for our conference, you should really do it. It's a heck of a lot of fun. Lots and lots of your peers there, lots and lots of exchange. And the focus is, you know, try to think about, you know, what's going on in the next 12 to 18 months, and, you know, how do you help your organization get a bit ahead of the curve? We also have lots more information on our own information governance site, on our resource center, and on our training course, particularly our IG training course. So make sure that you check that out. There's also a link to that in the resources widget. And then also just a reminder that we've recorded this, and it'll be available in the next day or so in the Webinars on Demand library. So if you want to share this with some of your peers, again, feel free to share it around. We really welcome that. And I just really wanted to thank you, Sue, and thank Iron Mountain for your participation and support. You know, I know resources are tight these days for many people in professional development. And without the support from folks like you, you know, we couldn't make this stuff available for free. And so we really do appreciate that. And so I'll give you, Sue, the last 30 seconds of, you know, what is kind of your thing that you want to really make sure that you that people remember in terms of NextGen Information Pros.
I think it is, don't wait to have things happen to you, but take the initiative and really, you know, get in there and find that hole that you or that hook and you know, really just work it hard. But don't sit back and wait. You've got to step up and be brash and maybe a little bit of a pain in the neck at times, and be heard.
So good stuff. I don't think there's anything better to say than that. Be brash and be heard. So thank you all, everyone. I really do appreciate the time. And for AIM, this is John Mancini, and we will see you next time.